my worst from bowl season so far is Cam Ward, the quarterback at Miami, playing in the first half of his game to break an individual passing record and then not playing in the second half of the game. Now, look, we've seen over the last decade plus where these bowl games are not college football playoff games, the importance is seemingly less. And you got guys who are certified first rounders who don't want to play an extra game with a chance of getting injured and wrecking their entire future. Where this gets complicated is in the NIL era. Cam Ward could possibly have gone to the NFL a year ago. He decided to come back because Miami ponied up the cash, ponied up the NIL money for him to play. And so he's going to play in the first round of a game, but not play in the second round. And I understand, I wish guys would never opt out. I want to see football players play football. That's why I have so much respect for guys like Matt Corral, who went out there and played and balled and ended up getting injured, and it hurt his draft stock. But I'm not oblivious to conceptually doing what's best for you in your future. I can't say what I would have done. I was never fortunate enough to be in that position. If my son somehow finds himself in that scenario where it's better off for him in the future of the family for him to not play a half of a football or not play an entire football game, certainly we're going to have that conversation, and we're going to do whatever we think is best for him. But to watch a guy go out there and say that this game is important enough for me to play in the first half where I could get injured until I break this record, but not in the second half of the game, I just have a real problem with that. And that aside, what I have an even bigger problem with is watching all of college football and sort of the media world defend it by saying, well, this is okay. This is basically a preseason game. Well, in the preseason, your stats don't count. So if this game matters enough for your stats that you're breaking records into count, then the game should matter enough. And I'm watching a 1-point ball game here where your team's trying to win and get a victory, and you're on the sideline clapping, trying to coach up the second string quarterback. It just doesn't sit right with me. I don't think it sits right with a lot of college football fans across the country, but there clearly is a faction of the nation that thinks that they have no problem with this. So I just wanted to see what you guys thought.
Well, I think a lot of people, your thoughts on this depend on what era you grew up in, whether it be right now in this environment, and you're playing or you're a part of it, or you're like us who may be a little bit older, not super old, but then we know what the older people think. It's hard for me to kind of take a 50,000-foot view of this because I didn't grow up in this era. I think we view this through totally different prisms. And when that happens, you're going to have people. I think you have some older people that are trying to be cool. I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make fetch work, and they're trying to sound like young and hip. So they're like, no, it's fine. It doesn't really matter. When they grew up in an era, and we grew up in an era, Blaine, even you're the youngest here, but this is it's almost like when it stopped being cool to go outside and play. Like people accepting that are like, when we watch all these kids play video games, we're like, how, I don't understand that. We used to play outside till the street light went on. Well, people change. Environments change. Society changes. I think this is the new environment of college football. So, the only thing I ask is that people keep the same energy. Just be consistent. If you're going to get mad at Cam Ward, you should be mad at Kyle Trask a couple years ago, who did basically the same thing. So even though I'm from a different era, I can be consistent. Now, personally, if it was me, if the game wasn't important enough for me to play the second half, it wasn't important enough for me to play the first half. If it was too dangerous for me to play the second half because of my future, it was too dangerous for me to play the first half. That's how I would have approached it. And again, like you said, Cone, I've never been in that situation before where there's that much money on the table. If it was my son, he would not have played in that game, even if he wanted to. That's what I would have told him, or that would have been the advice I would have given him, because it wasn't a championship game. I want bowl games to matter. To me, it looks worse when you play the first half and you don't play the second. If you just came out and said, listen, one, Emory Williams, I want him to have a chance to be the starting quarterback next year. He needs these reps. He needs reps in a big game, just like Nico needed him against Iowa, right? Just like Miller needed him in their bowl game last year. I could understand that. But to me, let me ask you this, because I think this has to do with Saquon as well. Because
that's why I wanted to talk about this last, so we could segue into that.
Yeah, I think there's some similar things there, because in reality, in the regular season, this game doesn't matter for the Eagles. They can't improve their position. They can't hurt their position, but he's trying to break a record. So is it worth you risking your health and your team in the playoffs for you to go get a record? Because that's basically what Cam Ward did, but he didn't risk his team's future. He risked his future. So in a way, I think it is kind of an unselfish decision, but I would have just not played the whole game, dog. Like, you're not going to lose draft stock because you didn't break this one record. You're getting taken where you're going to get taken.
So, Blaine, we'll set up the Saquon Barkley thing in a second because I want this to segue right into that. I think it's an important conversation. But what are your thoughts on what Cam Ward did?
He should have never played. Should have never played. Why would you ever? I would have never let my kid play in this game ever for the Pop-Tart Bowl. Buddy, you're a top 5 pick. You're not playing in this. And it's funny we sit here and talk about it. What I think is, what Miami fan? I bet Miami fans could care less. Could care absolute less. You had your golden ticket, your golden goose, Cam Ward, and you didn't even make the playoffs. You don't think they care about the Pop-Tart Bowl?
Blaine, the bowl game was a microcosm of the whole season.
You had Damian Martinez. You had Bain. You had all these weapons out of the portal, and you couldn't put a defense on the field good enough to stop a single soul. Miami fans, we can talk about it all we want, but they could give a rat's ass whether Cam Ward played a quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters.
I had one text me that this was pathetic. I mean, maybe he's the only one, but it's pathetic. And Miami rushed for 308, by the way, and gave up 42 points to Iowa State and lost.
They were this year's LSU.
Does the game matter? Does it not matter? I mean, I want to see guys finally realize that they only get so many times to go suit up and play the game. As someone who's now 37 and I can't ever play football ever again in an organized fashion, I want them to understand you only get so many opportunities. At the same time, I understand that, you have to have a long view of your future and what's going on with the NFL. I just agree with you, Jake, that I don't like playing one half of football, especially when you're trying to break some individual record, but your team's sitting there in a dogfight late in the game and you're watching trying to clap when you could have gone in and helped them win the game. Now, the Saquon Barkley situation, just so everyone understands what we're talking about, Saquon Barkley for the Philadelphia Eagles is 100 yards away from breaking the NFL season rushing record, Eric Dickerson's record. If he rushes for 101 yards this upcoming weekend, he'll be the all-time leader in the season. The Eagles have already clinched that number 2 spot in the playoffs for this final game of the season, the 17th game. Most teams rest their starters. They don't play them for a chance to get hurt and not win in the playoffs and not win a Super Bowl. So now we're in a situation, and Nick Sirianni, the Eagles head coach, has said he hasn't come to a decision, at least as we sit here right now, of what's going to happen. Would you guys, if not only if you're Saquon Barkley, give me that perspective, but also the organization and Nick Sirianni as the head coach's perspective on going out and trying to get this individual record versus just resting your players and not getting them hurt for the playoffs?
I think this is the easiest question in the world for both of them. I think you always ask yourself, what is best for our team? What is best for our team to win a Super Bowl? So whether you're Nick Sirianni or whether you're Saquon Barkley, I would be willing to bet, and I don't know Saquon personally, I'd be willing to bet that he would trade 500 yards that he's gotten already for a Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. That's why he went to Philadelphia, to win a Super Bowl. He hasn't won one. You already got a quarterback that's been in concussion protocol, right, who's trying to rest up. So they're going to need to lean on you in the playoffs even more now. So if you're Nick Sirianni, of course you don't want him to play because you don't want him to get hurt because he is your best player. You can say what you want about A.J. Brown. I think there's a great argument for Lane Johnson being the best player in the Eagles. There's some guys on defense that are really talented, but Saquon is your guy that's different. He is more different. Will always be an X factor regardless of who you play. And there's some really, really good players out there. Really, really good players out there. So if you're Nick Sirianni, of course not. If you're Saquon Barkley, is it worth it to you? Would you trade Eric Dickerson's record for a Super Bowl? I don't think so. I don't think so. And while there are some similarities in this, and Cone, to your point, the only playing a half sends mixed messages. That's what you don't want to send mixed messages. You want to send a strong message of, I'm in it because I care about it. I'm playing the whole game. or I'm not in it because, guys, it's not worth it. It's the Pop-Tarts Bowl. The most important thing that's going to happen is which one they choose to put in the toaster at the end of the game. So I'm not going to play it. I'm going to top 5 pick. I can at least respect that you made a decision and stood on it. To me, you played it both ways if you were Cam Ward, and I hate when that happens. But as far as Saquon, I think the answer is no. The answer is no. I think it's pretty simple.
Because you could have a similar situation here where Saquon gets his 105 yards in the first half, breaks his individual record, doesn't play the second half, sort of plays out a lot like the Cam Ward situation. Before I just get into a little bit more of a nuanced discussion, Blaine, what do you think? Is this just a no-brainer? Saquon Barkley, you just don't play in this football game?
Hey, great regular season, bud. Great regular season. Even if you did it, Eric Dickerson did it in less games, no one's going to take it serious.
And that's another part of the nuance I was talking about. I mean, the number of games, and no one's going to put an asterisk by it. You'll be the all-time rushing leader for a single season, but people will continue to talk about that, just like they talked about with Roger Maris and Babe Ruth and the number of games and things like that. If it's just about winning the Super Bowl, then to both your guys' point, yeah, of course, like it's a no-brainer. Like the team award is far more important than the individual record, and that's why I think if you're in there's different perspectives here that could come to different outcomes. If I'm Nick Sirianni and my job security just depends on how well we do in the postseason and in the Super Bowl, then no, like I'm not playing this guy. And I think Saquon Barkley has proven over the course of his career he's so selfless that he would 100% be on board with that. But to me, there's an element of this that's beyond just the individual rushing record. There's an element of this that we have to understand. The thing we're talking about, the reason people sit on their couches and watch these games week after week after week is this is entertainment. And we all want to see what is a human being capable of when they run out there every single week and they give their best. So I think fans around the country want to see, hey, what if Saquon Barkley rushes for 200 yards and resets a mark in the NFL? And I just think back to the golden age of our sport when we're talking about the Johnny Unitises of the world or Joe Namath. Me, there was never any thought about not playing in a football game. It's time to play football. You go out and play. Has the game changed in the sport? And we're just to your point about the different eras and different generations, Jake. Your value shouldn't change generation to generation, right? But I understand that the circumstance does. And are we just in a situation where it's like, hey, you just don't take the chance of getting your star player injured when you could win a Super Bowl?
Well, it's an interesting argument. I think a lot of it depends on, again, your age. But to your point, yeah, your value shouldn't change. But you do have to realize, again, and you brought up circumstance. I mean, back in the old NFL, you didn't have to win this many games in the playoff. Like the playoff wasn't this long. I mean, the amount of games you have to play so you've changed the circumstance. So if you change the circumstance, I can keep my values the same, but that doesn't mean I have to bang my head against the wall. I think there's a big difference in load management we've seen in the NBA during the regular season and this type of load management because your work's already done, right? If I hire you to mow my lawn and for a year straight, you're coming on time, you do a great job mowing my lawn. Hey, if one time you can't make it, you're sick, I get that. Or if something happens and you're not able to you've earned the right for me to give you the benefit of the doubt. I think Saquon Barkley, because of his actions, has earned the right to say, guys, this game is not going to move the needle for us. We have to win more games than ever now in the NFL playoffs, especially if you don't get a bye. So I think the circumstances change. Now, as far as you brought up kind of I just wonder. I think it is a little bit different, too. If this was a team that hadn't won a Super Bowl in a long time or maybe never, I don't think there's any question whether Saquon Barkley, if he was on your team, there's no way he'd play in this game. I think the only reason we're talking about him possibly playing is because the Eagles have won Super Bowls, and we've seen them. I think if this was the Chargers or the Jags or the Raiders or the Cowboys, there is no chance Saquon Barkley is playing in this game. But since the Eagles have been so dominant as of late, I think it opens the door for a little bit of the talk. That's what I think.
I just think there's also an opportunity. I mean, you could go get hurt and never play football again, much less play in this postseason, and then there's going to be a certain reaction from the country on that. Or you could go out and rush for 150, be the all-time season rushing yards leader, and then go win the Super Bowl. And then there's an element that gets talked about for all time in that too.
But David,
I
do you
understand the
think,
risk though.
and I know you do, but you brought up the important variable that has
Mhm.
to be talked about. We're not comparing identical things. It's just like Ashton Genty. If he'd have broken Barry Sanders' record by a yard, I wouldn't have counted it because they didn't count Barry Sanders'
Mhm.
bowl game. So, like, we talk about this they even talked about this with Caitlin Clark breaking that record. We've talked about this in Major League Baseball with the home runs, and not just because of steroids, because the amount of games that are being played now. So not only would you be risking an injury, even if you got that record, people have solid ground to stand on to say, hey, dog, like these things aren't exactly comparable. So I think that does add to it. I think that does have a little bit to do with it.
You think Dan Campbell would run him out there?
Man,
You think Dan Campbell, like the difference in coaching, like is there an element of this that's psychological? That hey, we're going to go get this record and win the Super Bowl. I mean, and just sets the risk aside to set the tone for the playoffs, or is it just every coach across the board is just, hey, you're not incentivizing me to go get individual rushing records. You're going to fire me if we do this well in the regular season and don't in the postseason. I'm not taking the risk.
Blaine, what do you think?
Yeah, Dan Campbell's going to run him out there. That doesn't mean it's smart.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
I mean, Dan Campbell would run the president out there if he had the opportunity, but I just think Dan Campbell, he's a different breed, man. He's a different breed, and right now it's working. I mean, look at what the Lions are doing. Like it's working. Well, I don't think Nick Sirianni would run that. I think Dan Campbell would 24 hours, 7 days a week.